All right, welcome to this episode of the It'll Buff podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Grochowski, and today I have with me a very special guest. All my guests are special because they're my friends and they like to talk to me, and so those people are special to me. They hold a special place in my heart. And so, needless to say, today I have with me Matt Malcom. So Matt, for those of you who don't know, currently works in ESG investing for a large Wall Street asset manager, and then prior to that worked for an NGO. And this is one thing you wanted me to share. His biggest passion is sharing philosophical ideas that have changed his life in applicable and accessible ways through his weekly newsletter, The Pocket Philosopher. Um, and so that's just a real brief introduction. And yeah, Matt, welcome to the podcast. Welcome on to all listeners out there. Tell us if I miss anything or anything else you want them to know about you.
Yeah, no, man, it's really great to be here. I appreciate the invite. I'm really looking forward to it. And sorry for the word soup of the bullets that I sent you. I wasn't sure what was relevant, so I kind of included it all. That was a great intro. I appreciate it.
No, no worries, no worries. It's one of those things where it's when I think about intros to people, right? It's again, it's a podcast. It's a
Sure.
very conversational piece, and what I've found interesting is that people want to be you would think somebody would want to be introduced in a specific way, whether it's retired so and so or
Yeah,
director of this, this and that. And it's interesting, so I'll briefly go over those achievements, accolades, and titles, and then
sure.
they'll kind of chime in and they'll be like, yeah, actually what I'm really passionate about is X, Y, and Z. So I
Yeah.
wanted to give you the opportunity so to share that. So all right, so we're diving into kind of really again one of those episodes on the It'll podcast, just talking about a separation story, a transition from the military into the corporate world with Matt Malcolm. And again, I've said this several times, there's no similar story, there's no similar path that people have
Yeah.
gone on, and Matt's is one heck of a story to listen to, and I'm excited for him to share it. So Matt, without further ado, just dive in where you want to start, and then we'll just take it from there.
Yeah, definitely. And I hope your post editing skills are good because we'll see where this meanders here.
It's gonna be great. It's
Um,
gonna be great.
yeah, I think the top line takeaway for me is that if I can do it, you can do it. I've had some maybe unique challenges as it relates to figuring out a post-army life. Uh, there was a lot of stock really into that question. If I'm not going to do this, then what am I going to do? That was a
Mm,
big part of my journey. So basically what happened for me was, we went to West Point together, locked us in for at least a five-year contract. And towards the end of my senior year, I started to change in ways that I was not expecting or couldn't really account for. And they weren't necessarily big changes about my worldview as much as they were big changes about my relationship to myself.
mm,
And the kind of the through line through all of this, the skill that I learned and that I'm still learning, but it's also the skill that most interested in. I'm interested in talking about is the skill of knowing oneself, and I think that comes down to really two abilities, and that's to know how you feel in your body at any given moment, and then within that space to know what it is that you genuinely want, not what you want based on sort of what you're primed to want, or what folks expect of you, but to really connect with that sense of why am I really here. And that's a challenge, and I think it takes a certain kind of courage to be honest with yourself about what that is. And so I was starting to feel that I was different. I was
mm,
becoming someone else. I was practicing things, maybe, in some people would call it like a contemplative tradition, a lot more quiet time, a lot less stimulation. And so there was this awareness of maybe that I'm somebody without all of the sort of the priming that had been done for me. I grew up in a military family. My dad is a retired officer. My grandpa is a retired officer. my great uncle. I mean, it was sort of like everybody that was I looked up to. They were all in the army and they were all officers, and so it was very natural that I think I would want to go, into that path. But there was this moment, this small space of separation there towards the end of first year, senior year, and I noticed that something was off, and I was starting to react to it. I was becoming extremely anxious, a little bit depressed, very concerned. And so when it came up to us to choose our branches, the jobs that we were gonna be doing, I I originally thought it was gonna look real heavy, maybe on combat arms. I had this dream, at least I thought it was a dream, to sort of have a very particular career path in the military. And right around, sometime in my first year, that really changed. So it was a bit of an existential crisis. It was one that I don't know I was fully ready to grapple with, but I knew enough to say, you know what, I'm actually going to invert my list, what I want to do. And so I had spent a lot of energy, preparing myself to do one of really three jobs, three branches. And there at the last minute, I said, actually, I'm going to invert this thing. And as luck would have it, I was randomly selected. I don't know if they still do it like this. I heard that it was a thing that they attempted at the academy this one year, but they were having trouble getting people slotted correctly. And so they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to randomly take 5% of the class. Like, we're just going to put everyone's name in a random name generator. And the folks that come out on top, 5%, we're going to take them and we're not going to give them their top five. And that means that 95% of the class gets their top five. And so I was randomly assessed or selected or whatever out of that top 5 percentile. And they told me the night before branch night, they said, you're not going to get your top five. And I was like, okay, because I had recently gone through this big change. I had inverted
Yeah.
my order of preference. I was like, well, my sixth, seventh, and eighth, they're pretty good. And they said, you're definitely going to get your sixth. So it comes branch night, and I got um, my 15th choice. So I had med service and like whatever the doctor track was, and to be an aviator. That was beneath it because neither of those things I had, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
pursued. So they were giveaways. So I got the one that was right above that, which was field artillery.
Hey,
Um, that's right. And
I'm
I
say
remember.
I'm saying that because I'm having like I wouldn't call it a PTSD moment, but just a flashback of field artillery was literally my like number 15th or 14th choice.
Oh, so we had the same thing.
And so I don't know. I don't, but so basically, I remember I put my top five. My top five was like I wanted aviation. Knew I wasn't gonna get it, but I wanted engineering. Like I was in a mechanical
Yeah.
engineering track, and I was like, the year before, like number 950 got engineering. So I was like, okay, like I'm not 950. I'm like 600 and something. Like I got a
We got
really good
this.
shot at this. And I guess like your TAC officer, I guess they at least did their due diligence to tell you like, hey, you're not getting your top five.
Oh, so you
Nope,
didn't have this moment where,
nobody
oh,
told me this.
interesting.
So I'm going into
Interesting.
branch night as if I'm gonna get
You think you're
engineers.
good to go?
And I open my envelope, and I kid you not, everybody opens their envelope, they're going crazy. I open my envelope, I throw it on the ground. I just walk out of I call. Like I'm flushed red, like
Wow.
ticked off to the nines.
Wow.
Not that I got field artillery, like whatever. Like
Sure.
it was gonna be, but it was that like
But you
it
had your
was
heart set on something.
and nobody told me. And then
Wow.
there was like I forget his name, Colonel whatever, I don't know. He stops me and he's like, "Hey, cadet, where you going?" I was like, "I'm going to the field artillery spot to get my beer so I can feel a lot better. Leave me alone, sir." And just kept walking. And I was like, either this dude's gonna turn me into my TAC officer and I'm gonna have a conversation tomorrow morning, or he's
It's
gonna
gonna feel
be
real
like,
bad for you.
yeah. And didn't stop, didn't rough night that night,
Sure.
for all the wrong reasons, but needless to say, I feel your pain. Sorry for interrupting. Keep on
No.
going.
What a small world. So I mean, you and I are probably having the same type of existential crisis, feet from each other, at
Yes.
that point,
Yes.
without probably even realizing it. Yeah, I mean, for anybody who hasn't seen Branch Night, to set the stage, it's literally, I mean, there's about 1,000 folks in the class. We're all in an
Yep.
auditorium. They give us envelopes, and kind of in this frenetic style, everyone opens it at the same time, and everyone acts very happy. They're like, my life is complete. I've accomplished everything I want, and they're super happy. They've been working for 4 or 5 years. Yeah,
Not
and then
this
guys
guy.
like me and you, we are we're having a moment of oh no. Um, and for me, baked into that, and it was more than just not getting something I wanted, because going back to the skills I was mentioning, how do I feel? What do I want? The skill, I think, to be able to manage that is also an acceptance of not getting what you want, and
Mhm.
that's okay, and making the most of it when you don't. Um, but in that moment, what I was feeling was something a little bit more, maybe like existentially profound, in that I was starting to flirt with ideas that I didn't know how I felt anymore about categorically, the taking of human life to
Mhm.
achieve any objective. I was reading other perspectives than the ones that I was grown up on, and this really didn't have anything to do with America. This didn't have to do with the specific types of wars that we are in. I think eventually I would think about those more deeply, but it was more this idea of what kind of person do I want to be? How do I feel about being employed categorically in the use of violence to achieve ends? And I was starting to study nonviolence for the first time as as a lifestyle. I was learning about myself and about how much, acceptance of things, how much better that is for myself, for it is for communities, versus the imposition of what I want, how I think on the world, like everybody needs to believe, you know, me essentially.
Yeah.
And I was doing this work of really bringing in to myself the focus. So I'd spent a lot of time sort of spotlighting, if these people in the world would just change, or if this foreign policy was enacted, or if these people just believed everything like I did,
Hmm.
then the world would be in harmony. And um, there's this great parable of uh, I don't exactly remember the origin, but it was essentially a monk who was looking. He was frustrated, and he was on this journey to sort of lay leather. It's an old parable, but lay leather on the ground around him, so that when he walked, he wouldn't have to walk on thorns and rocks and things like that. And he was exhausted trying to cover his routes, his daily routes
Hmm.
with leather. And someone suggested, why not just put the leather on your feet, and it was this idea of redirecting the sense of ownership back into yourself, and sort of taking care of what you are responsible for, and then accepting with temperance the things that you cannot. And so I was already starting to feel some of these things. I couldn't have articulated them. If you had cornered me and asked me to tell you what it was I was feeling, I probably couldn't have told you. But from there, I was like, I'm going to make the most of this. I started doing kind of what everybody does. I remember uh, General, I think it was Thompson. He was maybe not the dean.
He's the
I can't
commandant.
remember. Okay, yeah, he's commandant. That's right. He had left, and he went. I'd gotten assigned to his unit, and he wrote me a handwritten note, just like every one of our classmates going to his unit. He wrote us all handwritten notes and said, "I'm real excited for you to come here. I remember you. Like, I can't wait to see you perform." And I was like, "Okay, this is going to be okay. I can't wait to show up and do something positive, and maybe I just need to get out of academia." Um, so fast forward, during the break, I got married, like a lot of us did. During that time, been waiting on it for a while, and then uh, we were newlyweds now at Bullock, at Fort Sill, at the same time that
Oof.
you were. A good,
Big oof.
what I thought was going to be, an 8-month program. And so started going through that, and was really excited at first. I was like, okay, I was excited to kind of be out of the intensity of West Point, but feel like I was able to actually do things, and they were working, and I was actually getting
Hmm.
positive feedback, and I could be a little bit more of like an adult, maybe you could say, and feel like I could spread my wings just a little bit more, and uh, be more like a professional. That felt really good. And so that lasted until one of our first full-on like simulations that we were doing. And I was working, we'd studied for it. I think it was like a call for fire or something. I worked really hard, and was really focused on all the steps that we had to take, and got real excited when I had I can't remember exactly how they. I mean, you would know way better than me at this point, but there was essentially we were graded on like our ability to destroy enemy
Yeah.
positions and how many
Yeah.
casualties we accrued.
Yeah.
And when I had this competing feeling of I did it, and then I was like, I just worked really hard so that I could kill 80% of the people that I was looking at.
Hmm.
And this existential crisis that is definitely not one that everybody faces, and I don't know that I don't know that it's anything that I think on the macro categorically, but I knew for myself that that wasn't going to work.
Hmm.
I wasn't going to spend my professional life working hard to hone a craft whose ultimate objective was to take human life for any reason.
Yeah.
So now I'm in Bollock, and I'm really struggling pretty 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 profoundly, kind of suffering in silence. And one day I have a moment just personally where I realize like this isn't going to work. Like I've got to get help. So I uh, I don't remember how, but I had a connection with a chaplain that he wasn't related to our unit. It was just someone at the garrison, and someone had told me something about his background. I can't remember what it was. I said that's the guy I need to talk to. So I sent him an email. He said, "Come on over." After class one day, and I started meeting with him, and he was asking me a lot of questions. He'd been around the block a few times, so he knew what to ask me. And I went in actually with a packet in hand, and I said, "Sir, I want you to sign this. I think I want a branch transfer to the chaplain corps. Like that's what I'm going to do. That's how I'm going to make sense of this." And so after our interview, after a couple times of meeting with me and counseling and whatnot, he said, um, "Can't sign your packet." And I was like, "What do you mean? I'm not. I can't go back. I'm not gonna kill people for a living." And he said, "I think you need to get out of the army."
Hmm.
And I was really profoundly struck by that and kind of offended. And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" Because I was just so on this line of thinking. I'd been
Yeah.
working however many years. I got into the prep school by the skin of my teeth, just like fought tooth and
That's it,
nail
baby.
at USMAPS just to get into West Point. I mean, so much of my life, so much of stress and energy, all the decisions I'd been making since I was like a freshman in high school, this was my goal. So it was really hard to get off of that track. And so he said that it jarred me, and it successfully, I at least stopped on that track for a moment. And then he just began to paint another picture that maybe you've changed as a person. Um, I'm hearing you say, and you said all the things that I said, maybe you should consider an alternate route. And he was really clear to say, that's okay. Like, you haven't done anything wrong. You're not a bad person. I just think that you're putting yourself in a situation where you're going to accrue all kinds of moral injury for yourself, and then you're going to
Hmm.
displace it onto your soldiers. And I don't know if that's the best thing for any of us.
Wow.
Because he's like, what you're feeling is profound enough that I think there's going to be a negative ramification beyond just not liking your job.
Wow.
Um,
What a great leader, man. I
yes,
That's because I mean I feel like any other like senior leaders law first you would have gotten them and they're like yeah yeah you can go be chaplain score like I don't even want to, it's like I thought it was gonna be like I'm not gonna sign it because you should be a field artillery officer because I need field artillery officers in my unit. That's an awesome story to hear,
I
man.
thought that's where it was going too. Yeah. And I was ready, and that's why it was so jarring when he said, I think you should consider. And so I told him, well, I don't know if you know this, sir, but like I kind of just graduated from West Point. I can't. And so he told me, he said, yes, you can actually. And so he gave me all the information, and he made sure to explain it to me. He's like, I consider this an honorable path. You'll get an honorable discharge. Uh, and I think that if you request it, there's a formal process. No one's going to doubt your sincerity, and they're going to see that it's not just for your own good. Like this is definitely for the benefit of your future unit.
Yeah.
Um, so it was not an easy decision. I had to sit on it for a while, and I asked a lot more people, talked to a lot more people about it, and I was really surprised that once. So he gave me a lots of context, the language, what it was called. The process is called conscientious objection. I had a very vague understanding of what that might be. I think I was raised in a family that was very pro-military service. So whenever the few times I heard about conscientious objection, it was not in a favorable light. So that took me a minute to understand that there were other perspectives about it out there, and that maybe I was one of those people.
Yeah.
And then, I wanted to ask some other folks, here's who I am. What do you think? And even instructors at Bolick were like, hey man, it sounds like you know what you want, and that's important. And we're going to support you. And I was really surprised. I think I had all of two people in my entire process express, a judgmental opinion. And I was ready for 100% of, I was gearing myself, okay, no one's going to
Yeah.
understand me. That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm ready for this. And I was pleasantly surprised that I had two folks they didn't understand, and they pretty upset with me. Uh, and I was like, okay, within the Army at least.
Yeah.
And I was really surprised. So basically from there, they told me how I needed to formally do this. It was I kind of had it in my mind. There's this episode of The Office where Michael Scott, I guess, declares bankruptcy, and he just walks outside and screams, I declare bankruptcy. And I kind of thought maybe that's what I had to do. Do I just need to like go to the flagpole and just scream that I'm a pacifist? I don't know. Um, and so it was actually not clear. And that was the first like big hurdle, was like, how do I do this?
Hmm.
Eh, for obvious reasons, it's not the most accessible, process.
Yeah.
So I got a handle on it. I was connected with a team at our JAG office who had to manage the whole thing, and with my CO. And they were like, "Yeah, let's do this. This is what you want to do. Really happy you did this before you went to your unit, because that would have been bad for everybody. Now we can put another person, in the slot that you were supposed to go to. They build in X amount of people that aren't going to make it to their unit a year. So they were like, this is the place to do it. You're like at a TRADOC unit, low pressure. There's not going to be this conflict of you constantly needing to go train people, but you're waiting to, for
Yeah.
your packet to get. They were like, let's do it before you leave. So I was like, okay, like it was super positive. So we submitted it, and then this is when my transition story begins, which was I was now in the situation where there was absolutely no feedback in terms of when I was going to get my DD-214, exactly what was going to be on the DD-214, and whether or not actually they were going to approve it.
Yeah.
So, everyone said there's a good chance, but they couldn't guarantee it. So I went into what was almost a 2-year holding pattern,
Wow.
of, it was me, and I saw a couple XOs come through the training battery, and I was just sort of there with them, doing all that stuff, all the stuff they didn't want to do. They would go to the field, and they're like, I've got all this other stuff that needs to get done, and I was the guy to do it, and I did that for about 2 years. And every day I would wake up and I would call our, battalion legal, uh, you know, uh, paralegal, and then I would call the JAG office and just say anything, and they'd say not today. And I did that for 2 years, and I knew at some point one of two things was going to happen. They were going to write me back and say, nope, you got to finish Bolvic and go to your unit, or yes, you can get out. And they told me that if they approved it, I was going to have 14 days to transition.
Wow.
So I was in this for 2 years, where I tried to always have a 14-day ready plan. So, I mean, I had job interviews with people, and I told them, hey, I'm getting out, but I don't know when. And they're like, oh, that's how it is for everybody, whatever. And then they would say, when are you getting out? And I don't know. And then they would have to move on. So I got hired and, let go multiple times before I even left active duty, or was on active duty status.
Yeah.
And so that was real confusing. And, there was another portion of it where they let me know towards the end that West Point has a rule. They're like, hey, honorable discharge, this is totally fine, but we'll also have to recoup your educational expenses. So then I had this added pressure of knowing that there was also going to have essentially a student loan that I wasn't expecting to have, and I couldn't secure that job because I had this 14-day window.
Yeah.
So it was really stressful for, at that point, I got sort of the knowledge of what was going to happen. For the better part of about a year, I was just in this holding pattern. And one day I walked into the office, and there was someone in the training room, and they said, hey, Malcolm, somebody wants to see you at Battalion Legal. And I was like, what,
Yeah.
And I walked in there and just like nonchalantly, like, oh, this is for you. And they just handed me a packet, and it was an approval with honorable discharge, 14 days out. as a conscientious objector. And I learned what had to happen was, so I had an investigating officer that was sort of,
Yeah.
very classic Army faction. They interviewed me, my classmates, my friends, to determine that I was sincere and that this wasn't like an attempt to achieve an alternative objective.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, they verified that. They sent it up to my company or my battery commander, and then it went up to the battalion commander, and then it went up to the garrison commander, and then it went up to seven or eight more administrative levels before it landed on the deputy secretary of the Army's desk.
Wow.
And they were responsible for signing it, which is why it took so long to
Jeez.
get there
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
their desk. So finally they signed it, and that's when, I mean, a couple weeks after that, it took forever just to come back down. I got the notification. So at that point, I had been hired and fired a few times, and in that particular moment, I had nothing. So I'm
Yeah.
now looking at 14 days of transition. I really have no experience in the military at this point to pull from. I mean, I was an assistant to the assistant, whatever. I mean, there was like
Yeah.
no real, what am I going to say?
Yeah.
Um, and so the whole time I was there, I was really focused on just taking on random projects, trying to get random certifications, getting people that I would just do things with, random administrative projects so they could be references for later. I was just trying to
Yeah.
build up all those kinds of things. And so yeah, I'm 14 days out, like I said. I'm in between. I'd already the last thing I'd already I said I would do. They said no, we can't wait for you anymore. And and now West Point's gonna definitely recoup some of their expenses, which is probably fair. And I've got one kid with another on the way, and really, oh no, this is like crunch time. So I started what would now sort of become second nature as a skill, which is some strategic, I would call it strategic networking, some being really clear about what I wanted, what I was looking for. And, I had this dream in my mind. There was a nonprofit, an NGO that I was a donor for, and their mission statement was to end war. And I and these this particular group, they had teeth. They were rough. They were in places like Iraq and Syria. Showing up with aid in the during humanitarian disasters after
Yeah.
as conflicts would clear like a town, they would move in and provide all the necessary infrastructure as best as they could. They were a private organization. They would contract with places like different UN agencies and things like that. And I really wanted to work there. And so I started learning more, and I'd been following the organization, so I knew some of the folks there. And there was a woman who was she was a combat medic during the initial invasion of Iraq, and afterwards, I think shared sort of my feelings and experience. And I saw her as someone that I really looked up to, and somebody that one of the few people maybe that I would, I'm going to reach out to this person, and I'm gonna tell them I would love to work for Preemptive Love, but which was the name of the organization, Preemptive
Yeah.
Love. But even if not, I just want to have someone like you sort of in my corner. And that conversation went really well. She's still a really good friend to this day, and she referred me over to the CEO. And then I remember like I was out of the Army, um, just really hoping that something was going to work. And a couple days later, I had my sort of final interview with the CEO, with both of the founders, and they were like, "Yeah, we should do this. Is fun. Let's do this. This feels good." And so I grabbed a new job, kind of working in the space that I really wanted to, and they didn't have a lot of openings, so I took like a college, almost like one above internship kind of role. It was basically answering phones. Because I had nothing on my resume at this point to show for it.
Yeah.
And I just started, talking to donors, doing everything I could to support the organization. And then kind of my big break, I hate to say break because it wasn't about like my career
Yeah.
development or anything like that, but it was something that shaped my career. Was that, they had sort of put out a blanket all hands call and said, we're really interested. They're headquartered in the Middle East, but they said, we're really interested. in what's happening at the U.S. southern border because there's thousands of migrants seeking asylum from places like Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, and their stories are just like the ones we're hearing in Iraq and Syria. But there's this whole other weird thing happening that when they arrive at the U.S. border, we start a conversation in the U.S. about, well, are we a hospitable people or are we people that believe in strong borders? And that was sort of like not the point of what was happening. It was a humanitarian crisis, and
Hmm.
the realities were people were being assaulted and kidnapped. They were disappearing. They were being killed. There were innocent children fleeing violence, and so I said I'm interested. So on Thanksgiving break, I was in Texas visiting some family, and I took a quick flight, a Southwest flight, just on my own dime to Tijuana, Mexico, because there was a huge contingent of folks there. And I just started walking around Tijuana. I actually randomly walked across the border, and the first thing I saw was a big building, and it said Veterans for Peace. And I was like, that sounds like the kind of place that I should start. So I walked in there, and this organization called Veterans for Peace, they focus on helping. Well, they do a lot of things, but this chapter focused on helping deported veterans return to the U.S. There was a lot of gray areas and injustice in terms of people who had been in the U.S. military. Something happens and they get deported because they were on the path to citizenship. And so this organization exists to facilitate their return to the U.S. Um, and I knew about them. I knew a few people that had worked there at the national level. So I walked in and I met a guy, and he's like, "What are you trying to do?" And I told him, and he told me what he did in the army, and why he was at this place. He was a Vietnam veteran, and he's like, "Do you want me to take you?" And I was like, I think I would like that. Let's go." So it was a little bit dangerous. In retrospect, like I didn't think everything through, but he and I ended up walking, the streets of Tijuana for a couple days together, meeting folks from the Northern Triangle, and hearing their stories, and it was very much uh, what I was hearing to expect from people who had worked in aid, and not at all what I was hearing like on the news. And what it was folks who quite honestly didn't know where they were,
Mm.
which surprised me. It was people who joined groups of others who were fleeing various situations, people who had been assaulted multiple times or were being blackmailed, and they saw the safety of a group of people, a group of workers, you
Yeah.
know, uh, doing something. It started actually as a worker demonstration. This what in retrospect people called the caravan, and very very misunderstood from what I came to find. And but it became so big because there were so many people who needed a safe path somewhere else, and so they joined, and then they found themselves at the U.S. border, and they're telling me all types of stories of what happened to them, why they were there. All very consistent with all of the research that like my firm and I had done, or like the company and I had done. And so we said we want to do something. And by the time that we got funding and we were ready to go, the locus of the group trying to enter into the U.S. went to El Paso. Um, and it was kind of full circle because I was born at Fort Bliss, actually. And I was born, 5 houses down from the house that my dad grew up in when my grandpa was stationed at Fort Bliss.
Wow.
And so it was my turn to return to El Paso, but this time sort of in a very different way. It was kind of poetic in some ways. And so, me and my family actually moved down there for on and off for the better part of a year. And we went back and forth between, various partners in El Paso and in Juarez, Mexico. And did a lot of just the digging up the dirt, getting things going, really trying to focus on just amplifying the work that was already being done there because there was tons of people helping that were completely invested and they just needed allies. And so that was our focus is how can we show up and support them.
Yeah.
And it's cool in retrospect. I ended up leaving and I'll get to that in a second. But now, there was a little bitty program. There's some momentum going and I left. And a good friend of mine that I had worked with there. Her name is Jen Meyerson. Just a rock star when it comes to getting things done in the aid world. She's set up what's now I think 7 to 12 programs from the border all the way down to Venezuela. Um, and it's so fulfilling and satisfying to see that there was a little bit of interest I kind of went down there without knowing anything. It was really awful, honestly, those first few programs. They were pretty clunky. They didn't really solve much, to be honest. And I think we offended some people because it was hard to say, we're not trying to take this from you. We want to help you.
Mhm.
Um, and we were just another international organization showing up at the next hot thing. So it was really the work of the people after me, like Jen and the people, the team that she built down there, that proved, I think, to those local partners that we meant what we said. And so that was a really, looking back, I feel really just satisfied about how that ended up. But um, that took us to basically the time of COVID, and I was starting to realize then that my mental health wasn't doing well. That I think it was really stressful leaving the military. I was starting a family. All of a sudden money is becoming really important for the first time in my life. And then beyond that, one of the reasons that I, in retrospect, that I ventured out and I said, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go to Tijuana. I'm gonna go to Juarez. I'm gonna, work on this project is I think I was, this is kind of vulnerable, but I think I was a little bit insecure
Mm.
that associating my decision to be a conscientious objector with weakness, to be honest. And there's so many things about that I think I've really like worked through and processed. Even the fact that one, that I would really be concerned about weakness and that what other people would think. But also that I think there was still a big part of me that was in this culture of if you're not suffering, it's not worth it. You're not valid,
Yeah.
But it got, having kids was a really great mirror. It was a really great barometer because I was like, this is not sustainable. I had a couple close calls, nothing like crazy by any means, but it was just kind of this constant uncertainty and stress on the work front,
Yeah.
met with increasing just financial stress of, trying to work in aid essentially, Um, and so in the beginning of the pandemic, sort of started self-reflecting, and I was really reflecting on the fact that, and I was learning about the bigger narrative of why all of these refugees, essentially these asylum seekers, were stuck in borders all over the world. And I kept coming back to it that so much of it had to do with um, things that other people had done to them. So, for example, a very common story in Honduras is that an indigenous community would be living their life sort of without issue, just like they had for millennia.
Mm.
And foreign companies were working really hard to gain tracts of land in the region, so they could essentially destroy these ecosystems that were extremely biodiverse to put, like a monocrop plantation on. Very common, throughout the world. And so it would displace these indigenous communities that had lived there for, thousands of years. And it would started this cascade of problems that ultimately is leading to these migration crises that we're having all over the world. And I realized that there was a place in the world where the conversation was happening that prevented that original decision, that's leading to the destruction of these these environments where people are living.
Yeah.
And it was in this space. It happens most uh, successfully in asset management, but it's a conversation about understanding that when a business behaves in a certain way, they're creating all types of externalities, and some of them are really negative. And very rarely is that business actually pricing in those negative outcomes, because when you create a geopolitical crisis, that's a drain on GDP. It's a drain on, the business's own capacity to continue to function, on the way that it's perceived and it's valued in the marketplace, the way that its shareholders are compensated. And so, I really care just about the humanitarian side of like, these people need help, but I realized that there was a way to talk about this that would get the attention of the people that maybe without meaning to even were
Yeah.
creating these scenarios in the first place.
Yeah.
And so then I decided I'm going to pivot, and that's when I pivoted from working in the NGO world. Took a job in finance that I wasn't super crazy about, but I was like, okay, this is going to give me the grounding so
Yeah.
that then I can go work in asset management. And then so I did a short stint there, and then I pivoted into what I'm doing now. And so yeah, the job that I have now is working for big Wall Street, one of the big Wall Street asset managers, and I manage some of our ESG reporting, and the goal there is to um, capture the risk associated with behaviors related to negative environmental, social, and governance actions that companies take. We want to be able to understand those negative actions. We want to price them in appropriately. We want to defend our investors so that they're not exposed to those types of behaviors that could lower ultimately their return. And also oftentimes those behaviors are the ones that I have seen on the ground can also cause destruction, essentially, for local people. So it's kind of cool. It's kind of crescendo and everything's come together. And as you can tell, there was no clear path to get there.
That no, that was awesome. I going into this episode for all listeners out there, I was telling Matt that I was so excited for this specific episode because this is one of those. I mean, there definitely is not going to be another path that was like this one, and I think it's a testament to a lot of what I'm trying, the narrative that I'm trying to help create to those who are looking to get out of the military and pursue a life outside the military. And I think when you talk to individuals and when you understand the picture that they're trying to put together of where they see themselves, right? Creating this narrative, shaping this narrative of where they think they want to go. And then, that might not actually necessarily be the case for them. It's helpful to hear and have stories and narratives like this one specifically that show, I wrote down on my notes here, I said, kind of going through all of this stuff and getting to where you got today, I was like, it'll buff. It'll buff. And
That's right.
and again, I am not taking lightly all the stuff that happened to you, but I think, if you just flash all the way back to really kind of what your circumstances were when you started, right? This 14-day grab your bag ready to go plan, and the fact that you applied, got a job, like quote unquote got let go, applied, got a job, let go, applied, got a job, let go, right? Like that in itself takes a lot of failure. Now there is a lot of awesomeness that comes from that, in that you have had a lot of practice interviewing and you understand how the ins and outs of interviewing and crafting obviously what was somewhat of a decent resume if you've got multiple job offers. Very important skill. But right, all that, and then kind of going and hopping out of the military and having this thing actually happen and being like, oh crap, I don't know what's gonna happen, in 14 days, right? And then just working your way into these different worlds and getting to experience a lot of the ground level stuff that people will just come into an organization and don't, even know, like, they'll sit at their desk and they'll say, what is the daily impact that I'm having outside of my sphere of reference, right? What am I doing at
Mm-hmm.
X company today that's like, what am I doing, And so you actually got to experience all of that, and now you have a better understanding of, okay, now that I'm at this organization and in this job position that really I kind of wasn't sure I was going to get to, but like now that I'm here, I understand really well, what's going in and going on and what I'm trying to do on a day-to-day basis in that organization. And I think it's just awesome. It is literally an it'll buff story to the T. Again, not taking lightly. I'm pretty sure that I'm sure there was so much stress and so many nights of just anxiety and laying there in bed, wide awake.
Yeah.
What the heck? How am I gonna make this paycheck?
Yeah.
Am I providing for my family?
Yeah.
Am I there for my family? And so I totally get that, but again, going back to in my pilot episode, talking to people, I experienced this not into this extreme scale, but I experienced what it was like to be jobless for 5 months. And
Yeah.
so, when I
Yeah.
sit here and I say it'll buff, guys, look, I've walked
Yeah.
through this and I understand what that's like. And it's because you go through those experiences, those are the things that help sculpt you to really help paint a picture. Okay, yeah, now this is where I want to go and this is what I want to do. And so with Five and Fly and It'll Buff and this whole package, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to take those experiences and help paint the picture. Yes, I want every transitioning military officer and service member to get out of the military and land a job. I want that. But I don't want you to go into an organization where you're just going to leave in 6 months because it's like, oh, this isn't what I want to do. And so helping you make that decision so you're not worried about all of these things. Like, am I having an impact? Am I providing for my family? Am I doing the things that I actually want to do? Um, so, Matt, thank you again for sharing that story. That was awesome. And just such a great reference for, again, just another thing that I say in every intro, right? Like, there's a million paths to go on. There's no right answer to separating from the military. And the more that I can
Yeah.
get people to realize that, I
Yeah.
think the better off they'll be. And the less it really kind of frees you up thinking to yourself, like, oh, I don't
Yeah.
have to go do X, Y, and Z in order to be successful. No, like, sure, there might be some trials and tribulations along the way, and you could even land your dream job, and there's still going to be trials and tribulations
Yeah.
along the way.
Yeah.
And it's just, and all those things make you better, and they keep you pushing on. Now, one thing I want to go back to, because I think this is something that I've yet to talk about, and unfortunately, it happens now. It's not a 14-day plan, but there are those individuals who are in the military who either A, their command team didn't afford them an internship opportunity, right? Like the Hiring Heroes, CSP, Skillbridge internship, or something happening and they're getting medically discharged in that window, that
Hmm.
runway that
Hmm.
they thought was going to be longer has now been shorter. And so I just like provide a little bit of insight into, okay, what does this 14-day plan look like? And maybe, with that insight and obviously going through it a couple times, maybe how can we expand that to like a 30-day window, so there's to that person out there listening, like, okay, here's the practical things that I need to do to set myself up for
Hmm.
success so I have some buffer to transition. um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think my response to that is twofold. So one of the things, so first will be kind of practical, and the second will be a little bit more ways that you can prepare yourself that are going to feel intangible, but I think they actually are very tangible. So practically, I would say be open to start anywhere. Like if you're in that window and like push is coming to shove, and excuse me, it's 14 days, it's 30 days, and you just need to make some cash, don't be afraid. This is just me. Don't be afraid to just like drive the Uber, or you do the hustle thing while you're thinking. So when I first started at the nonprofit, it was at first I had quite frankly had to take a little bit of a pay loss to go work there, and then I moved to a new city, and it was more expensive than I was expecting. So there was a while where I was working at the nonprofit full time, and then I was working at a grocery store overnight, uh, stocking shelves because I didn't have the bandwidth there because the job was intense. Just because it didn't
Mm-hmm.
pay a lot. Like I mean, there wasn't like I could like have a side hustle. It was a lot of emergent kind of involved things, and so I was like, well, what I can do though is like basically during the weekends they had overnight shifts open, and I was like, maybe I could just like make some extra cash just to give my family a buffer. And I did that until the next thing evolved and I didn't have to do that anymore. Now, I think if I had had uh, you know, the um uh the ability to have a longer runway, would not have planned to do that by any means. And it's not something it's not on my resume, it's not something I even often bring up, but I'm saying that here because I think that is a reality to it. That not gonna lie, there's a little bit of a pride thing. Like, oh, I'm gonna go like work minimum wage job just to like get some extra cash. Um, and but at the same time, like I felt really good about that because it gave our family some breathing room, and we had two kids under 3 at the time. So you know, I think just having that sort of like creativity,
Mm.
and realizing that just because you're going to do something to make some income for a minute, if you're on that short timeline, don't judge yourself for it. Don't worry about does it need to be on a resume, whatever. Just build yourself some time. I've had friends that worked at coffee shops and that actually like turned into jobs for them because they would meet people and network and those kinds of things that if you're like, I just need to do something for a minute, doesn't have to define you, but if you just need to put your feet down for a second while you think, I'm a huge fan of, and also the experiences there, because quite frankly, I'd never had just like a minimum wage kind of entry level job like that. And so the friendships I made there, the types of people that I met, forever changed my perspective.
Mm.
Because I was in a military family, went right into West Point, right into the army, and then I went right into this, NGO job. And this was this experience I had missed of what it's like to just, show up as a minimum wage worker, what it feels like, how people treat you,
Yeah.
what it's how we were there in the mornings when the customers would come in, and all of a sudden, having to sort of interact with them in a way that they're definitely the grocery store was in like an upscale neighborhood. They're sort of like looking down at you, like those encoding those experiences were so good.
Mm.
And I think so good to sort of like balance me out. So that's the practical. Now, kind of on the more like esoteric, there are skills I think that you can be focused on and be developing, and it's gonna mean that if you find yourself in a 14-30 day transition plan, you're gonna have the toolkit to respond. And I think that those skills are the biggest one is imagination. We get really stuck in ruts. Um, we think that we can only do things in one way, and the more education and experience you get, the harder it is for us to imagine, to see it a different way. Um, so developing imagination looks like sitting down in the evening and it's making time to envision all the different outcomes, all the possibilities, take down the walls, think about the craziest thing, and then work your way back in. This is actually a Stoic practice from Stoic philosophy, which is essentially imagining all the possible outcomes, good and bad, imagining how you would feel and you would respond, so that when they arise, you have a plan in place that you can act on. You have a contingency plan you're ready to execute on, so to speak. But also emotionally, you're ready for it. It's not the first time you've been there
Mm.
because you've planned for it. And you can't do that for everything in life. And there's a skillful life requires you to just go through some of these experiences, but there are a lot of things that you can do that with. Um, and so just always, it's one of my favorite things to do. I don't know if you can see, I've got the couch behind me
Yeah.
in my office,
Yeah.
to sit and do some of that imagining. And it's creative imagining. What would it look like if I did this? You know, uh, what's the most out of the box thing I could try? So, um, in this vein, to speak sort of to I know your entrepreneurial bent. This is not another thing that I share openly often, but I actually, a classmate of ours, a friend of ours, a mutual friend and I, we have a vacation rental cabin in Georgia that we started together, and have learned everything about accounting and customer service. We're working directly with the guests, hospitality, taxes, just small business stuff, working with vendors, doing all the acquisition, like all that kind of stuff. And part of that came from imagining how fun it would be to try something like that because of just the intrinsic value of giving people, um, you know, uh, those experiences. So imagination is a big one, and I think another element of skillful living is developing discipline and temperance. And I'm assuming most of your audience is probably going to be, I mean, folks coming out of the military, right? That's who it's for. And what I've discovered is that when you encounter sort of the world of self-help and all of that out here, where folks are trying to help you accomplish your goals and those things, they're focused almost exclusively on discipline
Mm.
because it's the hardest thing to teach. But we have it kind of baked in. It's baked into the cake, so to speak. And you don't realize it till you get out here. But discipline, defined as the ability to set an objective and then back plan and then stick to whatever plan you lay out.
Mm.
That's a superpower, you know? And so just recognizing that you have that and then just focusing on like turning up, dialing up on that, accentuating what are the things that I can do to increase, my comfortability with discipline, to be self-disciplined, to take that initiative on my own. That's a skill set that will help you. It will keep you on track. It'll really help you as an entrepreneur if that's the way you go. It'll help you get to that first job because there is nobody ultimately responsible for it except for you. And so you've got to define the path to getting there. Um, Discipline, and then I think I said temperance was the other one, and
Yeah.
another good philosophical adage, which is, and maybe this is how I'll end. There's a wonderful parable about it. This is an idea that you find across many wisdom traditions, but it's the story of a farmer essentially who wakes up one day and his fields are flooded, and his neighbors say, "Oh my God, oh my gosh, what bad luck?" And he says, maybe. And then, the next day, his son falls and breaks his leg, and they say, oh no, what bad luck? And he says, maybe. And then, there's a war, and they come to recruit his son, and he's laid up in bed, so he can't go to the war. And they say, oh my goodness, what good luck? And he says, maybe. And then the government comes back later, and they say, your field flooded, and we have a program, so here's like X amount of money to start over. And they say, well, good luck. And he says, maybe. And so it's this idea of finding the middle path, creating a space between what's happening to you and your response to it. There's a great Viktor Frankl quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't remember it exactly, but essentially he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space, and that space is human freedom. Uh, our freedom is based on how we decide to respond to situations. And this is coming from a man who survived internment in a Holocaust camp during World War II. So a profound lesson that I've taken with me, that I'm not by any means in any kind of situation like that. And so those behaviors, if I look at them in the long run, I started off feeling completely existentially depleted. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know if I'd be able to do it. I didn't have any money. I was responsible all of a sudden for kids. And if I look back, it wasn't any one decision that sort of helped me find my way to where I am now, as much as it was those values and those behaviors and those lessons, and that led to the ability to be creative and imaginative and to sort of do the next right thing. Um, and so I think those are the big things. And I think if you find yourself in a 30-day, transition period, uh, be willing to drive the Uber and focus on developing those soft skills. There's no way that in a month or two you're not going to end up where you want to be, or just a step closer to where you want to be.
Yeah, that point on imagination is huge, because I'm gonna tell you right now, this podcast and Five and Fly LLC don't exist if I don't have an imagination. Right?
Yeah,
I'm sitting there.
that's right.
To this exact point. I'm sitting there in my living room. I'm unemployed. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if I'm going to get a job. I don't know when I'm going to get a job, right? I keep kind of getting
Yeah,
this, yeah, like we want to hire you, but we can't. We want to hire you, but you can't. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, what's going on here? What's going on? And you start to kind of go into this cycle of, man, like
yeah,
I must be the only person that's experiencing this. And then
yeah,
there was this thing in my head that flipped, and I started imagining. I said, well, now what if I'm not the only person that's going through this problem, right?
yeah.
And what am I being taught at this moment in my life that
Hmm.
I could turn on and pass down to the next person coming behind me? Because I wrote it down. It's in a document, and one of my whys for leaving the army, and really kind of a driving force for myself, is I want to make things that I've gone through easier for the next person that's coming behind me. That's always been a
Yeah,
mantra of my
absolutely.
life.
Yeah.
Make things better than you found them. Make it easier for the next
Hmm.
guy. Because if you do that, then that's when you allow for greater expansion of their growth, right? If you just keep making things better for the next guy to come in line, that's how exponential growth happens down the road. And so, to your point exactly, if you aren't, let yourself imagine what could be possible, right? Go into this realm of, the mind doesn't know the difference between reality and imagination. It doesn't. And so if you
Hmm.
start to
Yeah.
sculpt this imagination into something that could be tangible, and you set that bar for yourself, then everything else, to exactly what Matt's saying, as you're going through that process, just becomes a notch in your belt, where you're like, okay, now I have this tool, right? I learned how to do this thing. I learned how to talk to these people. I learned how to respond to those people. I learned how to do accounting. I learned how to do this. And you start to kind of learn how things come together, and then you go,
Hmm.
okay, wait a minute. Yeah, I know how to provide value here, and go forward. So
Yeah.
that's great insight. Now, the last thing I want to touch on before we land this episode, because this is another really important thing that I'm trying to teach and trying to expand on my own knowledge as I practice this myself. But this idea that you mentioned of strategic networking, expand on that a little bit, because right, there's networking and then there's strategic networking. And so yeah, kind of what's the difference? What makes it strategic as opposed to non-strategic? I have some ideas in my head, but I'd love to hear it from you.
So at first it's that you're networking even when you don't mean to be.
Yeah. Okay.
Because you don't want to. I think that there's a certain flavor of person, and I'm not saying this is wrong. And regardless, when anyone reaches out to me, regardless of their tone, temperament, whatever, as long as they're not being uh, inappropriate or something like that, I'm always going to help. Um, and I've largely had the same reaction from people. So maybe that's the first lesson, is that like it's really hard. If you send 10 messages, you're probably going to get on 5, 6 phone calls. Like that's just kind of how it works.
Yeah.
But there's this other element of like doing it well and creating a brand for yourself. And I think it was Steve Jobs that said, or maybe it was Bezos. It was one of the big sort of titans that they say a brand is what people say when you're not in the room about
Mm.
you. And so, you want folks to sort of like have that good impression, for the only reason that when you do reach out, they're like, oh, I want to talk to this guy, or I want to see what's going on. Um, and so, what's cool is that rarely I have found in business does like my deep enjoyment of like altruism and helping people actually like work, if that makes sense. And what
Ah.
I mean is like, ultimately things come back to value. Like, are you affecting the bottom line? And that's ultimately sort of what the business world runs off of.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times I like to give, and because I call it enlightened self-interest. I like the way that I feel when I do it. So it's for me, but I mean I like the way that I feel. So, but not a lot of opportunities to express that, and so sort of letting that out
Yeah.
on places like LinkedIn or in conversations with people or whatever, I feel that I'm creating this sense of safety for myself, that I have all these people that I really like,
Mm.
and that I've helped and that have all said, let me know what I can do. And so it feels good to know that I have people that want to help me just like I've helped them. And
Mm.
it makes me feel, there's a Nassim Taleb term called anti-fragile. I say that because a lot of people I think have, there's like some memes about it and stuff. Like it kind of would in a weird turn, but the idea is good, which is it's more than resilient. It's that, when the earthquake comes, you're not going to fall. You might get some cracks, but you're not going to fall. And so it makes me feel good when knowing that I have these folks that I really like, that I've been able to help, and already that they're all too happy to reciprocate. So
Mm.
strategic begins with tapping into your altruism, and realizing that everyone wants probably what you want, which is to be in a role with people they like and spend time with their family. And so, if you like helping people do find it for themselves, they're all too happy to help you do it for yourself. So, um, I think starting there, that's a big one. And then another one is realizing that networks are really powerful.
Yeah.
And I want to be careful because I don't want to like, I'm not a huge fan of like the good old boy network thing where, sort of folks get into places just because, they've been able to ride the wave of the last thing, and other people are historically excluded from those places. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about, but
Yeah.
real network, where you create communities, whether they're digital or in person or both, where you are interdependent with those people. So
Yeah.
you need each other. Those types of networks are extremely helpful. And, the more that you're creating yourself, creating your brand, I guess, as somebody that, oh, like I really need what that person has to offer, but then you're also being very straightforward about taking what other people are for you as well. You're creating this web of relationships that creates for you a safety net. And then there's also just like really practical things, and I'll just say two. Um, One is, and this goes for networking, but this really goes, I think, for all the skills. This is a soft skill, but I call it monotasking. And monotasking is in the morning I wake up, and there's however many 30-minute, hour-long blocks, never more than that, on my calendar. And this is what I'm doing today, and I'm not doing anything else while I'm doing that.
Hmm.
And so what that means is, instead of kind of spinning around in my chair, doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, wondering if I should do that, I'm going to sit down for 30 minutes for some imagination time, thinking about a problem. I'm going to sit down for 30 minutes, and I really have this thing that I've been learning that I want to share with other people. I want to share with some specific people in my network. So I'm going to sit down and I'm going to share that with them, and maybe make it personal. I've got some work that I've really got to get done. There's just some operational stuff that I've got to wade through. I'm going to make an hour for myself to do that. And the big ones are blocking off my time for email and
Yeah.
messages.
Yeah.
So, the morning I wake up, that's my time for email. And I've got an alert, like if it's of a certain level, I'll respond to it, but otherwise I'm waiting. So that's kind of one. And then another skill, and then the last practical skill is get really good at LinkedIn. I've been really impressed, at how much there's two things I do on there that really have seemed to resonate with folks, which is posting regularly about things, a handful of things, tight shot group of things that I care about, um, and developing sort of a rhythm and a cadence around those topics, and even kind of an audience a little bit. Um, and I've found through there, I've definitely had moments where a recruiter will reach out and say, "Hey, I saw this thing you posted. I'd love to talk to you about this opportunity I have." It's insane how it works. So it's just this tool. You share something that you like, a recruiter's looking for an expert, all of a sudden it's a match made in heaven. It's really that easy. And so going back to the discipline thing, we all have it. So just leverage the discipline and say, just like I used to wake up and do PT every morning, I'm going to wake up and,
Yeah.
do whatever you identify as the thing that's going to be the most important. Your Pareto task, the 20% of the effort that's going to leave the 80% of the results.
Yep.
Prioritize those. Do it for yourself first thing in the morning. And then, also on LinkedIn, get really, like, there's some things you can do going to a company. If you go into the About tab, about halfway down, you can indicate to an employer that you're interested, and all of a sudden they just have one of their recruiters will get an alert about you. And so now that you're on their radar, you can go to the people. So if you go to the company, go to the people, type your university, type your city, whatever. Find people that are like you, and it helps again, if you kind of have a network already, but if you're looking to build it, I found it's really effective. It's a numbers game, so I think really for about every 10, you'll get maybe 3 to 6 responses. But you just say, "Hey, I noticed," say something real personal about the person, like, "I noticed this article that you wrote, or I noticed this thing that you shared, really resonated with me. I'm interested in this company, this role. I'd love to hear your opinion about," and then something real specific. If you keep at that, like, you're going to get 50, you're going to get that 30 to 60% response rate. And then when you get on the call, you really just got to do three things: be on time, ask really good questions, and then always do. And this is the key. This is the one that separates, and this is what makes strategic networking strategic. Uh, is you say, "What do you need from me? What can I do? You know a little bit about me now. You see my network. How can I support you?" 9 times out of 10, they're going to say no. They're not, "Oh, nothing, man. Just happy to pay it forward," or whatever. But they now have a legitimate, reciprocal opportunity with you, and they leave the call knowing that you are their peer. You are somebody who is intelligent and thoughtful and curious about life and wants to make a difference, not somebody who is just looking for somebody else to give them a job. And it's a completely different interaction when you frame it in that way. But those are my, I think, strategic networking kind of boxes. That's how I think about it.
Man, that's so. What a great piece of knowledge and insight, man. That's so useful, and that's what I tell people too when they are looking to grow their network. It's be organic, be yourself. Go out to exactly what you're doing. Look at these companies, look at what they're doing, and just say, again, reach for people who either or in your alumni network or whatever. Just reach out to somebody who's kind of in the same
Yeah.
field that you want to go into, as far as, vertical, whether that's like project management, product management, HR, sales,
Hmm.
marketing, and just saying, hey, I think what company X is doing is unbelievable. It's, I would love to know how you became a part of this company, what type of role you play, and how I could come behind you or learn how to do something like that.
Yeah,
Like how did you choose to get to this company, and things
exactly.
things that nature. Just be organic. Just ask genuine questions of interest, right? Don't just go look at somebody and be like, oh, this is the director of so and so, and I know if I talk to him,
Hmm.
he has a direct link to the hiring manager. No,
Exactly.
start at those people in the company that
Hmm.
are just doing what you want to do, right? Like if you want to do marketing, go
Hmm.
look, just type, whatever, job position marketing, right? And look at all those people and just reach out to them and say, hey, I really want to do marketing, the marketing and compliment them too. Be like, hey, are you part of
Hmm.
this marketing effort at your company? This is really awesome. How did you guys do that? I would love to at least pick up some
Yeah.
tips and tricks as I, go on my journey of marketing. And then to Matt's
Hmm.
point exactly, this guy's like, oh, you're interested in doing this and you want to learn,
Yeah.
oh, okay, and then instantly you have that network where it's like this person gets to teach you. And if it's like anybody, people like to teach people to do things because it
Yes.
makes them better.
Yes.
And then
Yep. Exactly.
and then they know that it's like, okay, hey, like when they're reaching out, it's like they don't even have to, it's like, hey, I got this guy that I'm teaching exactly what we do at this company, let's go. Or
Hmm.
girl, guy or girl, sorry.
Yep.
you know and I think they'd be a great candidate to fill this upcoming role. And then, next thing
Yep.
you know, that's how it is. And so I've always told people when they go into networking, don't treat it, and also don't treat it as like that is that you're going to get a result from that. It might happen.
Exactly.
It might
Exactly.
happen 5 years down the road where this guy's like, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but you reached out and wanted to work at this company. I've actually followed your progress, and I'm starting
Hmm.
company X over here, and we need
Yep.
this, and I think
Precisely.
you'd
Yeah.
be, and you're just like, and it comes out of left field. You're like, oh wow, that's pretty awesome. Like that's pretty cool,
Yeah.
So I think that's really great information, Matt. Thanks for sharing. All right, so man, this was, and as I expected, this was an awesome episode. I know this is going to provide a lot of value to people out there who are listening to these episodes. Usually one thing I like to do when I land the plane, I like to ask people what was their why for getting out of the army, and I think that you really covered that really well in really just talking through your transition out of the army journey. And so I'm not going to rehash that because
Sure.
I mean again, you laid it out, just full circle, right? Like just there was this internal calling and this mentality where you just felt like you needed to be somewhere else. And I think thanks again for sharing that and just getting very vulnerable on
Yeah.
that. So so I originally actually asked this question and I changed it to what was your why for getting in the army. But the question that I used to ask in the first couple of episodes, I think it was like the first 4 or 5 episodes, was if you could go back and do it all over again, what is one piece of advice that you would give yourself to
Oh
be
man.
more successful?
Um, that's hard because what's changed is context in those frameworks that I was
Yeah,
telling you about.
yeah,
And so there, I don't even know like the things I would need to tell myself. I couldn't have absorbed them, you know?
yeah,
Um, so maybe the advice would be don't be afraid to spend time on, you know, learning to be skillful, whether it's imagination, discipline, temperance. Like, don't be afraid to spend time on those things because those are those are the bricks to the house that you're building.
mm,
It's really easy to get focused on the next job, is it enough money, and all those things, which are important. But like at the heart of what we're talking about is absolutely like those more intangible things. And I always wanted to focus on them, but I would have just given myself permission to say that that's okay, that's going to pay off, you
yeah,
know.
yeah. No, that's great. I think you hit the nail on the head with that. It's hard to look back, right? Hindsight's always 2020. The dots are always connected. The path looks
Yeah.
easy when you look back. And so I think that's one of those things that as you get through it, right, everybody's always, what's the answer? What's the answer? What's the answer?
Yeah.
Or what are these? Or what are these tips? Or what are these tricks? Or what's the 4-step process? And man, going all the way back to Coach Ellerson, I don't know if Coach Ellerson would ever listen to any of the episodes, but Coach Ellerson, if you're listening, I've this has always stuck with me throughout life. And what he would always say is the secret is there is no secret.
Yeah.
There is no
Hmm.
secret. It's just showing up, like you said, having the discipline to just continue on the path and
Hmm.
staying diligent on the mission that you have set out for yourself. And just for like those of us, who are in the army still or in the corporate world, it doesn't change. It doesn't change.
Hmm.
The mission that you are on in the army doesn't change. It just you're wearing a different outfit, and you're not preparing to wage destruction and war. You're
Hmm.
preparing to increase ROI and revenue for a company, and for your clients, and that's it. And the way you get there and the way you do that is the same way that you achieved objectives in the army, right? Like you didn't
Hmm.
your
Yeah.
your unit, your platoon, your company, whatever size element you led or are leading, they do not get to where they need to be if they aren't disciplined, right? In their
Yeah.
TLPs and all of
Hmm.
these things that they work on a
Yep.
monthly, annual basis, right? So that doesn't change. And so don't think just because I'm getting out of the army, it's like time to bro out and chill. Absolutely not. You should be sharpening that sword and be getting even better and really being disciplined in it because a sharp sword goes deeper than a dull blade, and
Yeah.
it's and especially as people who are seeking to get out into the corporate world and really make an impact, right? That should be your mission. Your mission should not be to get to the corporate world and just coast, because you're gonna get
Hmm.
chewed up and you're gonna get spit out, and it's not gonna be a fun ride. And your mission, and that's what people expect, especially in today's job market. People expect you to come in and provide value. Now, I'm not saying
Yeah.
that you need to be an absolute rock star, but you need to
Hmm.
be continually growing and learning. So all to be said,
Yeah.
Matt, that dude, this has just been an absolutely awesome episode. I am again unbelievably thankful for everything that you have just laid out for us on this episode, and really just dropped a bunch of knowledge bombs on us. I really appreciate it for coming on. And so, for those of you listeners out there, that concludes this episode of the It'll Buff Podcast. Just again, I want to remind you guys, June 1st, we are having the Five and Fly community is going live. Make sure you are a part of that. You do not want to miss it. We are going to be providing so much content and really trying to create this one-stop shop for you to come to and pull from all these resources. And then it's a place for like-minded people to come together and share currently what they're experiencing. And again, what I'm trying to do in life is I'm trying to provide a community that's going to make this process continually easy for the next people that come in line. So stay tuned for that. We have tons of episodes coming out. We got some more mastermind with the master of the mind. We're going to have the entrepreneurship series continue to grow and thrive. We're going to have more individuals come on, more words with our spouses. Guys, this is going to be a crazy journey. We're just getting started, and I'm so thankful that you're choosing to ride in this crazy train with me, if you will. We're growing. We're doing it. I just saw a stat today that 90% of podcasters and podcasts make it to 3 episodes, and then the 90% of those podcasters and those podcasts make it to 20 episodes. And if you do that, then you're in the top percentile of podcast in the nation, in the world, whatever. And I'm not saying that as a look at me. The only reason I made to this spot today is because of people like Matt and all you guys who've come on this podcast episode, and then all the listeners who are out there who are continuing to provide me feedback. Hey, go talk to this person because they have a cool story, and go talk to this person, and you should do this and you should do that. And then so it is honestly more of an applaud to all you guys out there. Thanks for helping this podcast and this community get to the top percentile in the podcast world. But the mission's not over. We're going to stay disciplined. We're going to keep imaginating, and we're going to keep thriving. But in the meantime, guys, as you continue to go through your military life or in the corporate world, remember, it'll buff.